It's time now for Countywide, a special presentation of Yavapai Broadcasting News. Join News Director Paul David as he talks with our community's leaders, newsmakers, and people in the know. You'll hear about the hot topics that affect all our lives in Yavapai County. And now, here's today's Countywide.
Welcome to Countywide. I'm Paul David. As always, it is great to have you in studio with us today. Conrad Jackson from the Prescott Fire Department, fire engineer and paramedic. Welcome back.
Happy to be here.
Last time Conrad was here, I asked him to come back because he is like the Prescott Fire historian.
By default, I became the historian for the department.
He's got a book to prove it by Arcadia. So this is all in a book in Arcadia with Conrad's name at the bottom of it. But I wanted to have Conrad come back in because the history shows are always fun to bring to Countywide. They're always great.
Well, no, I like doing it.
And who doesn't want to hear about the history of the area they live in and find out a little bit more and get educated? So
yeah, sure. It's the oldest department in the state, so we got a lot of history there.
It is the oldest department in the state.
Yeah.
That's the first fact right there. Yeah. Okay. So the Prescott Fire Department website is prescott-az.gov, prescott-az.gov. So I've got two things on my piece of paper here, history of the department, future of the department. So let's start with the history of the department. Let's fire away.
So history of the department would be, we were formally established and acknowledged in 1885. That's when the City Ordinance 25 happened. And they said, we're going to establish a department. We really started a little ahead of that. The local business owners, the Goldwaters having some business there, really wanted to keep their businesses safe. So they started pushing early on to get some kind of fire coverage. And so they had them and a bunch of their Masonic friends, that were kind of the influential business folks in town, had purchased a wagon and then loaded it with ladders and pike poles and stuff like that. And then the wagon was stowed on Elks Hill in Prescott behind the Masonic Temple. They had a little shed back there, and that's where they put the wagon in. And it was stowed there. Now, in 1883 and 1884, we had a couple really big fires in the downtown area. Not to be confused with the 1900 fire. Everybody knows about that one. Downtown had pretty much burned up in 83 and 84 prior to that happening.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was a recurrent issue in the Prescott area at that time.
Okay.
Tragically, though, the 1884 fire had killed the owner and publisher of the Journal newspaper, the Miner Journal, and he died. And so his staff was really, really distraught at having lost their boss. And so they really started campaigning, a lot of letter writing to the city powers that be, to establish a fire department, establish a water system in Prescott. And so by 1885, we had both those things.
Wow.
We had a steamworks that was down kind of where the Granite Creek Park area is, that would push water and push it up to, it's called Palmer Hill. It's on South Mount Vernon. And so they had a storage tank there, and then the pipes would gravity feed back down to the downtown area, and then they had hydrants on the corners in the downtown. So that was 1885, it was official. And kind of anticipating it, those same entrepreneurs, the Masons, had purchased a hose cart.
A hose cart, okay.
So a hose cart is a little different than a hose wagon. So the wagon had all the ladders and pipe poles and stuff like that, but these hose carts, knowing that there were going to be hydrants, would have two big wheels and then a shaft through the middle and then like an individual spindle in the middle that they would roll up 600 to 800 foot of hose onto. And these were drawn by the guys, and they would race that hose cart to the nearest fire hydrant, and then they would unspool the hose and then disconnect the hose, play off as much as they needed, disconnect the hose, put a nozzle on it, and fire up the hydrant, and that's what they'd use to spray water. So no engines. So really,
it was literally all manpower.
They're being pulled by guys, and the water pressure associated with it was strictly whatever the gravity of that elevation was. So not particularly high pressure lines.
But better than a chain bucket.
Right, better than the bucket
buckets,
brigade in the old style.
Yeah.
Yeah, so right out of the gates we have a wagon and we have a hose cart. Well, the downtown, how do you want to say it? The saloon proprietors and such, they wanted in on it. And so they got themselves a hose cart also and kept a hose cart down right in the middle of Whiskey Row.
Okay.
And so these guys, they called themselves the Toughs. The first two were the Mechanic Hooks and Ladders was the wagon company, and then the Dudes had the hose cart. And they actually kept those, since they were all kind of Masonically related, they all kept them in the shed right there behind the lodge. But the Toughs kept theirs right there in the middle of Whiskey Row, which makes a whole lot of sense.
Sure.
They're already up at night, so they were pretty
fast response.
They were Johnny on the spot for night fires. They were all over it. So each of those companies is 25 folks. 25 volunteers was what they maxed their rosters out at. And then we had another company that was called the OKs, because we actually had an OK Corral in Prescott.
Okay.
Yeah, right across the street from where the Charlotte Hall Museum is, actually. So the whole firefighting force was 100 volunteers. So that being said, the population of volunteers would ebb and flow over the course of our history, just because the Spanish flu, wiped out everybody. We had wars. People would go off to war. And so when you're doing the history, from the writing perspective, and you're reading through the old stuff, there's letters where parents are giving their 15-year-old permission to come and join, go be on the Dudes or go be on the Toughs or be on the OKs.
Oh, wow, okay.
So yeah, there's very special permissions. Now what I think is really kind of entertaining to that period of time was if your company got to the hydrant first and managed to put the fire out, you could get a kickback from the insurance company. So they were appreciative of the fact that you kept them from having to pay for all this material and such. So they would give a kickback to the company. Well, the two hose cart companies, the Dudes and the Toughs, would literally get into fights. They get into fisticuffs over who got the hydrant and then who got credit for it, because there's bragging rights but there's also money associated with it. So they'd really get into it. So they had to, within the first year, establish some rules as to this is allowable, this is not allowable, who's going to get credit for it. Whoever got to the fire hydrant first would get credit. Even if, let's say, the fire was 800 feet away and you only had 600 foot and 200 foot came from the other hose cart, because you got to the hydrant first, you get credit.
Okay.
Now, it was really, really popular, hose cart racing was. Those two companies, right out of the gates, the Toughs threw down a challenge to the Dudes, said, we can beat you. And so they would start doing hose cart races downtown. And unfortunately for the Toughs, the Dudes won in all of the initial races. And so there was a really a sticking point. There was vandalism to the Dudes' businesses after the Toughs would lose.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really heartfelt. Now, what I find that funny is that they would be that mean to each other, but as a nation, hose cart racing actually became in vogue. And we would send our teams to Albuquerque to compete in Southwest regional competitions. And we're talking like real competitions. The Albuquerque team was bringing in Canadian sandbaggers to like stock their team. And what we would do is we would take our 4 local companies and take the best of the best from each of those companies, consolidate them into the best team we could form, and then send them off to Albuquerque.
You all have to work together right now.
Right, yeah, so, and they would. So they would sow some strong solidarity, bring back the pride. And so we ended up in 1890, 91, and 92, won it 3 times in a row. And the Albuquerque team was really ticked that we had won it, and started sending letters saying, hey, you guys need to give us back, there was a buckle that went with it, and give us back the buckle. And the chief at the time said no. Said, tell you what, we won it 3 times in a row. You guys can go fly a kite. We're keeping it forever. And really ticked them off. Now, they did send Albuquerque the dog collar off of their dog, whose name was Sport, and said, we'll give you a buckle. And they sent the dog's collar to really just push that point.
We got to take a break.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Prescott Fire Engineer and Paramedic Conrad Jackson in the studio today. We're talking about the history of the Prescott Fire Department. This is Countywide. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
Parents, you know as well as I do, there's nothing more important than your children. Don't you love to look in their eyes and see the love? Make sure they can see that love in your eyes by having their eyes examined. You can't tell how well your kids see, but Dr. Houston at Camp Verde Eye Care certainly can. Call 567-3330 to make an appointment. You'll be glad you did. Camp Verde Eye Care at 567-3330. They really do care.
Hi, this is Michelle and I welcome you to Sedona Paint Centre. We are here to help you find the perfect colour scheme and product for your home and business. Enjoy free in-store and in-home colour consultations and free paint samples in a colour of your choice. As a special offer to you, just mention this ad and save an extra 10% and enjoy 30% off store-wide.
Turning your real estate dreams and goals into reality, I'm Claudel Johnson with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. For more than 7 years, I've helped both real estate buyers and sellers put me and my team's extensive knowledge of the Sedona and Verde Valley area to work for you. Come see a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath, single-level home with a pool at 50 Sedona Street. You'll love the Sedona Red Rock views from this VOC area home. We turn your real estate goals into reality. Claudel Johnson at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services of Arizona.
My mother was always very familiar with her neighborhood, but one day she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual, and she didn't know whether she should go forward or turn, and she wasn't even really sure where she was at. It was very unsettling for her.
I felt so much better after my son told me, "Mom, I don't want you to worry or be afraid. I'll be there for you and we'll figure it out."
Welcome back to Countywide. We're learning about the Prescott Fire Department history with Conrad Jackson, Prescott Fire Engineer and Paramedic. Their website is prescott-az.gov. A lot of this stuff can probably be seen in Charlotte Hall Museum as well, correct?
They're a huge resource for
also your book,
materials. Yeah, and they actually carry my book in their bookstore.
Okay, so Charlotte Hall Museum is going to have a lot of information. All right, your last story, skipping ahead, there's this buckle. 3 years in a row. Where's the buckle?
That's a good question. And what we think happened to the buckle is there is a buckle at Charlotte Hall Museum that has fire damage with it. So what we think happened is, subsequent to that, one of the chiefs, when he retired, had a music store. And in the music store, he kept a bunch of fire paraphernalia. Well, his music store caught on fire, ironically enough, and it destroyed a bunch of equipment. So we think maybe that fire-damaged buckle that they have at Charlotte Hall could be the one.
But there are no
we
pictures.
don't know that, but we have no pictures of it. So
there are no
really
pictures either,
yeah.
So we weren't that proud of the buckle when we got back with it to take a picture. Unless, of course, pictures were taken and they were lost.
Yes,
that's a possibility.
Which is a
well.
distinct possibility.
I mean, this is the late 1800s, after all.
Right,
okay.
So few and far between.
So what's next? We've got volunteers, so are we jumping to...
So before we get to actually paid, actually the first two guys we ended up paying were because we bought a wagon. A horse-drawn wagon. So you need somebody to take care of the horses, and then in the event of fire, take the horses and hook them up. So in 1906, the city purchases Howie Hall, which is a former opera house right where City Hall stands today.
Okay.
So they would use it for city offices for various services, and then it also had a small stall next door, like a barn, where they could keep that fire wagon, and then a couple horses. Joe and Babe are the name of the horses. But here's the catch. The first wagon that we bought was so big that Joe and Babe couldn't pull it up the hills to get up like Elks Hill.
No.
So it became problematic. So within a fairly short time span, we ended up having to go back and purchase a smaller wagon. And we used that wagon for, close to the next 10 to 15 years.
Wow, really?
But what ended up happening is the horses ate themselves out of a job. They were eating $500 worth of grain, plus the city was paying for the two engineers to maintain the horses. So they became expensive. Well, lo and behold, this new invention comes out and starts becoming super popular, these little Model Ts. So let's buy a couple Model Ts, we'll throw the hose on the Model Ts, we'll have the guys just drive the Model Ts. So they purchased 2 Model Ts. In 1915, they buy 2 1913 Model Ts. And then a couple years later, we buy something called a Vele. It has a gigantic fire extinguisher on it. So it's like a pickup truck with a giant fire extinguisher. And so then we start using the Vele, and then they realize a fire extinguisher's not cutting it. We need a legitimate fire engine. So in 1926, we buy an American LaFrance. We call it the Frog. It has big bug eyes in the front, and so it's either a slur on the French, or you can just say it looks like a big frog, because it does, and it kind of bounces when you're driving it. And that's our first legitimate pumper. It's 750 gallons per minute, and that took us into the modern apparatus age.
Wow.
So we buy that in 26. Well, the next big transition for our department occurs about 30 years later. The population of Prescott in the early 50s hits 10,000. And the insurance underwriters start looking at our community and going, you've hit 10,000 people, you're run by 100 volunteers, your fire department is, and not only that, your 100 volunteers pick who their boss is. The city doesn't even choose who the fire chief is.
Oh, wow.
And they're like, that's the monkeys running the zoo. That doesn't cut it with us. They said you are going to become a professional department. We want a paid chief that is selected by the city. We would prefer you also had paid firefighters as well. Okay, because volunteers, you get what you pay for sometimes. And so there was this huge transition in 56. We hired a chief, Chief Custer, who ends up being our longest running chief. He's in there for quite some time. And then they ultimately end up hiring 8 other firefighters paid. And they each get assigned something. Like, so one's in charge of the signaling, the game well system, the little boxes that used to be all over town. One's in charge of the radios. One's in charge of the apparatus. So they all get specific assignments. Then that 100 people that have now been displaced, they take 30 of them and say, you're our most able-bodied. You're going to be our core volunteers, and then the remainder become the auxiliary corps. And so they just kind of do fundraising and stuff like that. So that's the huge transition in 56 for us. And then so we proceed at that point, just kind of as the community gets larger and larger, and we start hitting these 10,000 more people in the community. We add additional stations around town. We put in a very large airport fairly early on in the history of Prescott. And so we put a fire station out at the airport. We still are running out of there today. And so there's a certain irony that the population for Prescott Fire Department, the firefighter population, is 60. As opposed to the 100 that used to volunteer, we have 60 paid. Now, that being said, our 60 folks that are on the fire department today do a whole lot. We are what's called an all-hazard department. So we're not just doing firefighting. I mean, it's the tax dollars that are paying for us, right? So wildland fires and structure fires aren't happening constantly, so you want the best bang for your buck. So we also run EMS calls. We run technical rescue calls. It's a very popular area for people to be getting out in the woods and hiking and stuff like that.
Hazmat calls.
Yeah, and hazmat calls. So those are some of the big categorical things that we end up doing as an all-hazard department, is covering all those different needs within. We are everything to everybody is how we look at it. And our call volume this past year was over 10,000 calls, which is enormous.
And most of that is usually the EMT. We have to take another break.
Yeah, 60% of our calls are medical.
Medical calls, okay. Prescott Fire Engineer and Paramedic Conrad Jackson is in studio today. We're talking about the history of the Prescott Fire Department. Stick around, Countywide back in just a couple minutes.
Northern Arizona Thermal Imaging uses a state-of-the-art medical digital camera to take a picture and create a map of the body's infrared patterns, later interpreted by an MD specially trained in reading thermography. Northern Arizona Thermal Imaging is the leading medical imaging and proactive healthcare, detecting early danger signs years before other tools, finding early breast disease up to 8 years before mammography may detect it. Schedule a scan with Carol today. Northern Arizona Thermal Imaging. Say yes to thermography.
Northern Arizona Mortgage Corporation is your local choice for personalized home loans, and they've been doing it since 1986. They help home buyers obtain FHA, VA, USDA guaranteed rural housing, and conventional loans. From start to finish, they offer a safe in-person application process with licensed loan originators. Contact Shelley White Collier at northernarizonaMortgage.com or call 634-4251. Visit their office, located at 707 East Mingus, Suite 601, Cottonwood.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Julie was always a voracious reader. She'd carry 2 novels on an airplane because she'd read one on a 3-4 hour ride. And at some point, I began to notice that she would read a page and couldn't remember what she had just read, and she'd have to go back and read it again.
I don't remember much these days after I read, but less does for me, and I love it.
Welcome back to Countywide. We've only got a few minutes left of the program, then we're going to say goodbye to Conrad Jackson. But it's been a nice little quick look at the history of the Prescott Fire Department. So thank you for coming in and doing this. And you wrote this book. How long ago did you write this book? I
was in the process of writing it 6 years ago.
Okay, and then how long did it take you to actually put it together? 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
Okay, he was telling me before the show they had a room that he had all this stuff in.
Oh yeah, my storyboards, yeah.
I think between this book and Charlotte Hall Museum and just spending some time roaming around Prescott, I mean, it's all historical. Downtown Prescott is historical, period. It's just so much history there.
Yeah.
Everywhere around here, there's so much history. But I really appreciate you coming in and talking about this because this has been really neat. Just you could see the growth. Oh, yeah. People are like, we're stop the growth, but you just can't stop it. We're talking 1880s to 1926. We went from no fire to a fire truck.
Yes.
In under 100 years.
And it's interesting if you look at the progress and how big the population's got, and you look at how many calls we've responded to on the year, and they go lock in step. Right along with each other. And so obviously when the recession hit, we stabilized our population, but I think we're obviously getting ready to go into a big growth spurt. Mm-hmm. And I think along with that, our current Chief Light is looking at where we're going from here, because we have this larger population. We have a lot of expectations. So we're actually going through the process of trying to get accredited right now, which is as a profession, we look at the services that we provide and how we provide them, and we have other agencies look at us and say, here's the expectation. You should be doing this, you should be doing that. And our application is going to be about 1,000 pages when we're done. Looking at all these categories, 10 different categories. There's 256 different sub areas that we have to say, yeah, we do a good job at this. No, we need to improve this. This is how we think we should go about improving that, to bring us up to a level of professionalism that is a step above other agencies that don't pursue accreditation. And then you have to try to maintain it, which it's not you earn it and then you walk away from it. It's a constant.
How often do you get rechecked on that?
You get an annual evaluation where they come in and say, are you doing it? Are you doing it? And then I believe it's every 5 years they come in and do a full evaluation of you and say, you're really not.
You're really doing here, but
the annual things are to kind of keep you on track, and then at those 5-year marks, they look at it and say, yeah, you're doing it. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. What's your next plan? Where do you go from here? So they keep you on that the whole way.
So we got about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
So we went from being an agency that just fought fires pretty much to an agency now today, and all agencies are like this pretty much, where it is fire, it is mostly EMS. I think you said 60%.
60% are what our numbers are at right now.
60% of your calls are for somebody who got hurt. So when I hear sirens in my neighborhoods, oops, somebody got hurt. Their weekend is just got ruined.
Your odds are in, and we keep a paramedic on every engine because of that, because we run every, in fact, right now our agency, as a part of our next transition, is we're going to try to put 2 paramedics on each engine.
Wow.
Because more is better for if things are going south.
Yeah. Conrad, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
All right, folks, again, Charlotte Home Museum, and then Conrad's book. It's at the museum as well. So check it out. It's really interesting. That is today's Countywide. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.